Greetings gamers, today I'm going to be showing you how to make some Endor style trees for Star Wars Legion. The Forest Moon of Endor is one of the most iconic locations in the Star Wars franchise, and one of the things that makes it so iconic are the massive trees found there. Today I'm going to be showing you some simple and easy techniques to replicate those trees on the tabletop. So let's head over to the bench and get started. These trees are built around a cylindrical structure. For mine, I'm using some strong cardboard tubing from a roll of pallet wrap, but a postal tube will also work great. You can use paper towel rolls, but they are much weaker and more likely to deform or break. If you do use a paper towel roll, I suggest stuffing it with scrunched up newspaper to give it some extra strength. My method for making these trees is very similar to the way that Tabletop Oddity does it. You should check out their channel for plenty of Legion content because they do great stuff. I'll put a link in the card for you to go and check them out. We're starting off by making the base. I would usually use a 6mm MDF for this, but I wanted to get this build done quickly, so I'm just using a piece of foam board for this example. Use your tube to get an idea of the size to make your base. You want to make the base big enough to give the tree support and stop it falling over, but not so big that it wastes material. Once the base is cut and beveled, I hot glue down the tube. I then start running beads of hot glue up and down the trunk. This helps break up that flat surface of the tree and add more depth to the finished piece. I space my lines of hot glue by a few centimetres, but varying how close together they are can change the final texture of your piece. Once the hot glue is dry, I make a roll with some DAS modelling clay, which is a cheap air drying clay which you can find in most craft stores for just a few pounds. I put this roll at the base of the tree and then blend it into the base and the trunk. This is the first step of the root structure. Next, I take smaller rolls of DAS and begin making roots with them. These don't need to be super realistic, you're just trying to make the bottom of the trunk look like a real tree with roots. After blending all the roots to the base and the trunk, I come back with a wire brush and add a little bit of texture that'll get picked up with dry brushing. If you want a more realistic tree, you could clad the entire trunk in DAS and then use a wire brush to add texture all over the piece. This will look much more realistic, but it takes a lot longer and will be much more expensive in terms of material cost. I use a hairdryer to dry the surface of the clay out so I can immediately move on to the next step, add in some texture with tissue paper. The most important part of this step is using plain tissue. Any texture on the tissue is going to be passed on to the tree, so make sure it is plain tissue you use. I'm using a box of face tissues, and as you can see, I'm ripping the edges to remove that clean manufactured look. I start by covering the hole at the top of the trunk using a watered down PVA mix to saturate the tissue. I recommend using a sponge brush for this step as it's less likely to tear the tissue. After working my way all around the first piece of tissue, I hit the tree with a hairdryer again so that first tissue isn't soaking wet when I go to apply the second one. I do this exactly the same as last time, ripping the edges, but for this second tissue I start applying it from the bottom, just above the root structure. You could clad the roots in the tissue, but I find that to be fiddly and time consuming, and I don't think it makes that much of a difference to the overall result. Again, I work around the piece covering the tissue with a watered down PVA mix. I pay particular attention to the areas between my lines of hot glue so that they are quite defined. Once the tissue is applied, set the piece aside to dry overnight. You can also use a hairdryer again to speed up this process. Another method you can use for applying the tissue, which I haven't done here, is to cut the tissue into strips and then lay those strips down running vertically with the tree. This results in a thinner layer of tissue where you don't get any bunching and can look quite good. When the tissue is dry, it's time to start painting. I coat the entire trunk of the piece in Mod Podge and black paint to add an extra layer of strength, and then once that's dry I base the entire piece, including its base, in a dark brown. I was going for a quick and dirty tree here, so I gave it a single dry brush of some brown mixed with a cream colour. A good way to get more neutral and realistic tones for your trees is to mix a little bit of grey into your paints to desaturate them. Once the trunk was painted, I moved on to the base, adding a layer of PVA glue before sprinkling Woodland Scenic's fine turf lightly all over the base. I then filled in the rest of the base with some Woodland Scenic's blended turf. And here's the finished piece. From here you'd be able to add some other small vegetation to your base to match the style of your gaming table, and you could add some moss or vines by gluing flock or lichen to the trunk, which adds nice details to the tree and helps them stand out from one another. What I love the most about these trees is how scalable they are. If you want something really cheap and easy, you can just follow along with this tutorial and you can just have a table filled with great looking trees in no time at all. But if you want something that looks much more realistic, you can spend that extra time and money to clad the trees in a clay and brush on that texture, and then you can spend longer painting and finishing your pieces. But whatever route you go, they all start from that same base structure. And there you have it. These are really simple techniques using really simple materials, but they give a great result. One of the great things about this style of tree is that you can spend a different amount of time on them depending on how detailed you want it to be. If you just want something basic and quick, you can follow most of the steps used in this video, but if you want something a lot more detailed, you can clad the whole piece in DAS or another clay and then texture it all up and it will look really realistic. That's all for this week, folks. Don't forget, if you are picking up a copy of Star Wars Legion or you've already got a copy of the game, let me know which faction you're going to be choosing down in the comments below. And until next time, happy gaming. Thanks for watching. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below for new content every single Friday. And if you want to keep watching, well, there's another couple videos for you to watch just over there. Happy gaming.